I'm glad everyone can be here. We'll get started here on our class. So far we talked about some specific problems with, that you may encounter in your marriage. We talked about 3 weeks ago. I think we talked about the midlife crisis. Kenny last taught on the empty nest, And this chapter, isn't a really season like those, because this could happen at any time. Okay, so it's always a potential. So I want to start with this story. So this is about 30 years ago, and there was this great church, and they had a growing Bible class. This Bible class was for people in their 20s, and boy, it was thriving, And like you see with our family here, a lot of people in Bible class, they're going out to dinner together, they're hanging out, there's a lot of camaraderie. Friendships are growing. It's just really nice. And then one day we find out that one of the guys is having an affair. In the Bible, and it just shocks everyone. And so it's learned that, okay, that happened. So some of the people approach the guy. They try to return him to the Lord, to restore him. It doesn't work. It's really sad. He leaves the church. He gets a divorce. It was awful. That was my friend, and I haven't spoken to him since. And anyway, so we don't talk about this subject much, and I've been preparing for this class. I've been thinking, wow, what if we would have had that class back during that time? Maybe this stuff would have helped. I think very few people enter marriage thinking that they plan to have an affair. I mean, we don't. It's not one of those things in your vows. I mean, it's the majority of the nation really disapproves of extramarital affairs. So, but let's don't be naive. Christians are susceptible to that. I've seen it happen here, and we got to be diligent to protect our marriages. So that's really what the reason we need to talk about this subject is, to just being diligent and being knowing some of the warning signs and so forth. Fidelity to each other is something all married people are called to do. Jesus explained it well in Matthew 19. Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. And here's the point I want to emphasize: what therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. We should remember that fidelity is more than just restraining a sexual drive towards someone other than your spouse. When couples marry, they are to be faithful in all areas of our lives. To the marriage itself. Faithful, you got the friendship phase where you're developing that friendship so that each other sees each other as their best friend, and to God, as we are joint heirs. 1 Peter 3, you husbands in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. So Christians are to minister to others in the name of Jesus Christ, and this means our spouses as well. When we set our vows, pledge to be true and faithful and loyal and honest, it's quite possible that that was so long ago you don't remember what those vows were, what they really meant at the time that you were saying them. So tonight we're going to discuss affairs and unfaithfulness so that we can be better prepared to fight off Satan. And we're going to break it down like this. So first we'll talk about negative fidelity. Then we'll talk about fidelity and faithfulness. We'll talk a little bit about why people have affairs, some warning signs, talk about mental adultery, and then we're going to end on a positive note about being virtuous, okay? So some of this is going to be what not to do, but we're going to try to end on a positive of what to do, you know? Okay, so let's talk about negative fidelity. So there's this author, this theologian, professor. He authored a lot of books. His name is Lewis Smedes, I guess. He described negative fidelity this way. A man or woman can be too busy, too tired, too timid, too prudent, or too hemmed in with fear to be seriously tempted by an adulterous affair. But this same person can be a bored home, callous to the needs of their spouse. This person may claim that they never cheated, but they also could have been too cowardly to have an honest communication, never trying to grow along with their spouse, not having a deep personal relationship in their marriage. And then they began to neglect their marriage. Unfortunately, the thinking of most of us towards marital unfaithfulness is limited to sexual involvement. But in a broader sense, a large portion of couples have been unfaithful through involvement with some things as opposed to someone, someone other than their spouse. So when our thoughts get preoccupied, our energy is drained, and our marriage is neglected, then we are involved in a non-sexual affair. So class, what are some things that can get in the way? Now, hang on, let me save you a little bit. Anybody watch Family Feud? Okay, now I'm not Steve Harvey. I'm not going to ask the question and then when you answer, assume that's the way you're thinking, okay? So it's a safe place here. You can just tell me, what are some things that can get in the way? Work? Mm-hmm. Recreation? Children. Mm-hmm. Different interests, yeah. Mm-hmm. Pride? Oh, that's a good one. I didn't have pride on my list. I had some of those others. Golf. Friends. You know, sometimes maybe friends get in the way. Parents-in-law. Oh, okay. Yeah. Technology? Yeah.
And laziness, if like they can go hand in hand. Like you're just, if you just spend all your time on your phone or video,
Yeah. We can become addicted to social media, Fidelity in marriage means that we are protected against any outside interference. Fidelity is positive and is based on God's fidelity and vow to his people. Let's look at this verse in Hosea. I will betroth to me forever. Yes, I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice, in loving kindness and in compassion, and I will betroth you to me in faithfulness. Then you will know the Lord. God's fidelity was a commitment for the good of his people, their development, and was meant to be a blessing. Fidelity means more than just avoiding affairs. It's a positive moving ahead with the development of a growing marriage. Okay, so that's our first topic. Any other thoughts before I move on? Okay. Let's go to fidelity and faithfulness, okay? Wayne, you're one of the senior ones here. What were your vows when you got married?
That she would cook. And I would eat.
I think that's my point. Do we even remember what those were,
Till death do us part.
There's probably some guy in here that's like really the champion and has it on a note, on his phone and can read it again. But Yeah, it's hard to remember those. So a vow is supposed to be binding regardless of personal need fulfillment, lack of love, the attraction of another, or incapacitating illness. Couples need to commit to fidelity without making any qualifications, limitations, restrictions. And without the promise of fidelity, there can be no trust. No fidelity, no trust. Faithfulness to a vow with no faithfulness to the growth of a marriage, well, what does that lead to? It leads to emptiness, frustration, feeling of being trapped. Now, for couples that built their marriage upon the trust of erotic love without the attention to agape or phileo, the struggle to fidelity is greater. Eros is not the love which loves in spite of. Agape love, Christ unconditional love, that's our stabilizer. Eros is based on the fulfillment of a personal need. Eros cannot stand alone. It needs to be attached to agape and phileo to achieve good balance. Agape brings in some realism so we can see our spouse as imperfect and accept them as such and realize our own lack of realistic expectations. I mentioned a moment ago that, Christians fall short and some have affairs. In the Bible, we have the story of adultery that we are most familiar with. It's David and Bathsheba. And we can read about it here in 2 Samuel. Now, when evening came, and David rose from his bed and walked around the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful in appearance. So David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" David sent messengers and took her, and when she came to him, he lay with her. Why was David ready for an affair? Have you ever thought of that? What kind of love was David experiencing right then? Eros. Have you ever thought why God included this story in the Bible? Anybody have an opinion on that?
I think, I'm not sure, but I think this story is prefaced with, in the spring when kings went to war, and David stayed home.
Hmm.
He wasn't where he was supposed to be. And yet he said, David, a man after my own heart.
Mm-hmm.
After all this happened.
After all this happened, yeah. I mean, it's the story of forgiveness, you know.
I think that he included it because David at this time in his life is king of Israel. He's had many great military victories. He's basically at the height of his power.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout all of the Old Testament, well, the majority of the Old Testament after David, Israel looks to him as like, the son of David, the king, he was the pinnacle. Everyone wants to remember Israel back in its heyday under David's rule.
Yeah.
And God includes this story of David in his heyday, that when you were at your highest, and when everything seems perfect and you're inclined to sit back, relax, and just enjoy life, you are the most vulnerable to
Mm-hmm.
corruption and
Yeah.
falling into sin. So showing David as this God's ideal servant, and showing how easily it was for him to fall into
Mhm.
that same trap as an example and a lesson.
Yeah. Very good, Patrick. I like those thoughts. Well, that leads us to our third point here of why people have affairs. Let's talk about that. So, during midlife, affairs are common occurrences. A man's desire to recapture his fleeting youth and masculinity, coupled with a sense of stagnation in his own marriage, helps set the stage for infidelity. The same reasons can propel a woman to another man. An affair can be used to cover up feelings of discontent. Many times a person will engage in an affair with someone at work, someone they're around a lot more maybe than their spouse. And there's a lot of reasons for this. I mean, one person may be using the affair to gain power or control at work, or perhaps the person has a feeling of pity or sympathy for the other partner. It might just boil down that the two people enjoy each other's company. Some other reasons, and let's just keep in mind my focus here. Why are we talking about this? We want to be on our guard. We want to against Satan, because he's at the door. One reason why people have affairs is it may be an attempt to get out of the marriage. Let the spouse discover it so they would file for divorce. These are things that the author has gotten from research and put together. Another reason is a means of punishment and revenge. One spouse is abused, neglected, or taken advantage of by the other. Sometimes, this is kind of twisted, they try to sustain a failing marriage. They use the affair to infuse excitement in an empty marriage. The one having the affair is aroused outside his marriage and then returns to his spouse in the hope that the arousal will carry over. We have a yearning for romance. For some, the excitement of the unknown is very satisfying. Another reason is unresolved anger. That can push one into an affair in order to punish the other partner. Here's one, perfectionism. That compels some to want more than they have and to seek the impossible. We have escape from life's pressures, such as the job or in-laws or boredom, etc. The promise of excitement and acceptance is an alternative to facing their own responsibilities. Boredom. Just people are flat out bored. Sexual deprivation. A lack of interest or a passive partner can create a frustration level which prompts one to seek other satisfaction. And then you have emotional deprivation is a major cause. The lack of need fulfillment and intimacy creates an intense vacuum. So the need for emotional intimacy is one of the greatest reasons for the affair. Another author, or maybe this is I can't remember what this Darrel, Dr. Carlfred Broderick, he summed it up in 3 R's. Okay, so he talked to dozens of couples who have been involved in affairs, and in most cases it centers around these 3 R's. Resentments. Resentments open the door to affairs and can stem from anything. Insensitivity, excessive demands, neglect, lack of response and rejection. And then next comes rationalization. That plays a large role in entering the affair. People have faulty beliefs. They think it can't happen to me. Or they think flirting's not dangerous and it means nothing. Most people get themselves into infidelity through empathy, concern, and compassion than through any other base motive. People want a shoulder to cry on. They want a sympathetic ear. The sympathy turns to tenderness. Tenderness turns to a need for privacy. Privacy to physical consolation. So we got resentments, we got rationalization, and the third is rendezvous. Okay, often grows out of continual contact with another. It can happen through work, kids' school functions, getting together for coffee. This is why the office environment is a prime setting. You go to the office, people, they look good, they put on their best clothes, You know, if you're just the guy at home, you're in your sweats and your t-shirt with holes in it, and you know, and when you're at work, you're noticing people that look good. They're on their best behavior. If the marriage is in trouble, it is nice to be where you're accepted and understood. Spending time in privacy with an attractive person of the opposite sex can be dangerous. If resentment and rationalization are present, then rendezvous can be easily planned. All right, any debates there on those? Making sense? Okay. So let's look at the warning signs. You know, we got to ask ourselves: am I leaning toward an affair? You know, we as Christians, you know, we're to demonstrate fidelity, purity, integrity in our marriages. Drifting toward another can be a subtle, gradual process. Those who deny the possibility of ever engaging in an affair, they may be the prime candidates. Denial of the warning signs may mean that if involvement occurs, it'll be hard to stop. So here are some of the warning signs suggested by people who had an affair. Okay, let's look at these warning signs. We got a drifting marriage. We have, you know, that feeling that you're simply going through the motions. Emotional energy is non-existent. This next one, creation of excuses. You know, creation of excuses to continually visit with someone in your work or your social circles. You know, people who have feelings for another begin to find ways to be with that person. Coffee breaks, making phone calls over non-important items. Let's look at this one, repetitive contact with a person in a work or a social setting. Too much togetherness can lead to a desire for increased intimacy. Another warning sign is you're preoccupied with thoughts about another person. Daydreams or fantasies about another person is a sign of danger. Exchanging gifts with a friend of the opposite sex. You know, the amount of thought and time that goes into the selection of a gift is another indicator. How about this? Phone use. Now, the author said phone use, but I'm going to modernize it, texting. Okay. I'm not sure when this book was written, but you know, are you always on your phone or texting another person? Putting yourself in situations where you increase your chances of meeting someone who might become more than a friend. That's a warning sign. Body language. You know, what do our nonverbals say to each other? Okay, so what do you think of that? Got any other warning signs to add? Or?
I think if you even ask yourself that question, it's probably a warning sign.
Oh.
If you're even thinking,
If you're, yeah. Mm-hmm.
do I need to be asking myself this question?
Yeah, that's a good
Pretty
thought.
strong warning sign.
Okay, I want to contrast this, all right, because, I mean, let's be honest, everyone in here, I see you guys every time the doors are open, okay? I don't think this is the people ripe for unfaithfulness in marriage. So I want to kind of set it side by side with something else to draw out the illustration, okay? Now, notice how similar these warning signs are to people who fall away from the church. Drifting spiritually. You're simply going through the motions. Your emotional energy is non-existent. You attend services just to check the box. You know, there's a reason we want our members to check in. I mean, every week, Wayne, we look at a list of people that have been absent maybe 3 weeks or more in a row, you know, just to make sure what's happening, you know. We talk about them every week in our meetings, don't we?
And we pray about it.
We do, yeah. Well, that's one of the things that we're concerned about. Creation of excuses. You know, you find ways to be away from the church. Repetitive contact with, I'm going to add, with non-Christians. You know, you surround yourself with non-Christians too much. That can lead you to kind of believe their beliefs. Preoccupied with thoughts about what you're missing when you're in church. You know, what else could you be doing tonight? You know, could you be at a ball game? Could you be, doing something else? And I put in here too body language. You know, what do our nonverbals say? What do you act like you want to be at church? You know, at the services. How you stay faithful to God is how you stay faithful to each other. And how you become unfaithful to God is how you become unfaithful to each other. There's so many similarities when I think about this. Think about your commitment to your vows at marriage. And that kind of parallels your commitment to when you were baptized, you know. Anybody else have anything to add here?
I think you could add selfishness to that list. You're focused on yourself, what you want.
That's
You're
good.
not building a relationship.
Yeah.
I'd also add neglecting time in prayer and reading scripture. I know that the times when I've been the weakest spiritually is when I really haven't been active very much with looking at God's word or
Yeah.
active in prayer. Just kind of been going
Yeah.
through motions and things. But
One of the reasons I tried to put this side by side is, okay, yes, I want us all to think about being on our guard against unfaithfulness in our marriages, but look for the warning signs among our brothers and sisters here too, you know. It usually starts slowly, usually, drifting spiritually. So Jesus said here in Matthew 6:33, this is what I call the first things first. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So some questions to ponder here. Who are you putting first? In your spiritual life, in your marriage? Am I leaning toward an affair? Am I leaning toward unfaithfulness to God? Just trying to get us thinking about being on our guard in all aspects. Okay. Let's go to the next point. Mental adultery. Now, we're all prone to temptation, and mental adultery is where many affairs begin. Our thought life, what's going on up here in our heads. Our imagination is, spawning ground for our overt actions. All of us struggle with our thought life. We got some verses that show how man has thought life can be. In Genesis 6:5, then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That's happened to man in history. Romans 8:6-7. For the mindset on the flesh is death, but the mindset on the spirit is life and peace, because the mindset on the flesh is hostile towards God. For it does not subject itself to the law of God, for it is not even able to do so. So, okay, we're talking about really what's going on in our heads, the mental adultery. So let's talk about this illustration. So the brick wall is symbolizing a barrier, and that's the barrier to an affair. And this first illustration here, there's two main factors here: the imagination and the need. Okay, so these are the two main factors that lead a person to an affair. So this first diagram, we have the person whose imagination is a high level. He spends time in fantasy about other people other than his wife, but his need level is fairly low. So he's not breaking through the barrier. In the second diagram, we have a person whose need is at a high level, and his relationship is sterile, but his imagination is fairly low. He doesn't spend time fantasizing about other people. Now, what happens when both of these are high? Well, the barrier crumbles. All right, when one's needs are not being met, and imagination of an affair is high, and add to this resentment, rationalization, rendezvous, and the person becomes a prime candidate for an affair. Let's look at what Jesus said about this in Matthew 5. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So that's mental adultery. Okay, any comments, class, or thoughts you'd like to share before we go to the next phase? Okay. We're going to end early, class. So let's end on a positive note. Being virtuous. So we covered a lot of ground tonight, and our purpose is just to make everyone aware of the pitfalls. So we hopefully have a better understanding of how people get into these situations. So let's end the night looking at scriptures that show what a virtuous wife and a virtuous man should be. So let's first look at the virtuous wife. You probably know a lot of these are going to come from Proverbs 31. So first is a sign is trustworthy. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. Another sign of a virtuous wife is filled with an enduring love. Okay? Verse 12, she does him good and not evil all the days of her life. Another aspect is compassionate. She extends her hand to the poor, and she stretches out her hands to the needy. Another quality is strong character. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future. Proverbs 31:25. Let's throw in here wisdom and kindness in verse 26. She opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. Fears the Lord. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Okay, class, anything else comes to mind about a virtuous wife? What are some other good qualities?
Wayne says she cooks.
All those things are about being selfless.
Oh, good point, yeah.
Someone who's selfless.
Mm-hmm. The virtuous husband. We had to include him too, right? So here's a good quality. Values his wife highly. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. Once again, Proverbs 19:14. House and wealth are an inheritance from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. A virtuous husband praises his wife profusely. Proverbs 31:28b. Her husband also, and he praises her, saying, many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all. A virtuous husband trusts his wife implicitly. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. A virtuous husband is content with his wife. Enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life, which he has given to you under the sun. For this is your reward in life and in your toil in which you have labored under the sun. Ecclesiastes 9:9. And we're going to end here with Ephesians 5. And be subject to one another in the fear of Christ. Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church. He himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. So husbands ought also to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does of the church, because we are members of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is great, but I am speaking with reference to Christ and the church. Nevertheless, each individual among you also is to love his own wife, even as himself, and the wife must see to it that she respects her husband. Closing thoughts. Anybody got any thing they'd like to add?
Darrell, any man that wants his wife to be a Proverbs 31 wife needs to be a Proverbs 32 husband.
Oh, that's good, Carrie.
I think it's important to remember those, like, it takes time, like, affairs don't just happen, so what you do in your day-to-day
Mhm.
matters. So we have things that we do every year, like, we get away once a year, and it's hard to do that, and sometimes
Yeah.
I think it's just so much work to take care of the kids while we're gone, and to meal prep, like, we do everything taken care of, but then we do it, and we remember why
Yes.
we do that, but if you don't keep doing that, your feelings change from day to day, but
Mm-hmm.
and that's where it can get very.
I think one of the things that has happened to a society of people is this type of thing, affairs, have become acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. It's not, it's kind of the Humpty Dumpty philosophy. He falls off the wall, scatters in pieces. How do you put him back together again? Well, you don't. So you just trade him in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people look at that as being, it's just an opportunity.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, many or most of those people, they're not always, Satan wants the hardcore people, the people who really trust in God. If I can get them, then the rest of the story is
Yeah.
real easy. And all we've said tonight has been, stay close to God.
Mm-hmm.
In our society today, the attitude looking on marriage is throwaway marriages. They're not making a lifelong permanent vow until something better comes along.
Wayne, you were telling me last night, you were saying the old days, sorry, I don't mean judges would try to, in a divorce court, not,
It's all about reconciliation.
it's all about reconciliation. And now with today's culture, it's just about convenience,
I think that's why it's all the more important for us to
have social groups in the church, because
Mm-hmm.
if you go off the statistics of the world, you have a better chance of failing in a marriage than succeeding. So it's critical to have the right people around you to support you and help you and
Yeah.
encourage you.
I think that's what both of you were saying. You have some good balance there, you know, time to yourselves, but also time with other friend groups. Yeah.
It's important for your children to see a healthy marriage too.
Mm-hmm.
I think when they get to the point when they go to friends' houses and see differences, they come home and they talk about it.
Yes.
So-and-so's parents did this, you guys don't do that. Why don't you, they were yelling all the time, why is that?
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that here, things
Yeah.
like that. They start to see the
Yeah.
positive influence, and then when you surround yourselves with friends and like-mindedness,
Mm-hmm.
they're supported and encouraged as well.
Very good.
Well, a good marriage builds you up spiritually.
Yeah.
A bad marriage tears you down spiritually.
Yeah.
What do you want it to do?
You know what I've seen from friends that have gone through similar things is communication just isn't happening. They're talking at each other and not to each other and listening and growing from that. And when one person's saying, I need this, and the other person's saying, but I need this, and they're not
Yeah.
doing what they need to do. And that's what drove this particular couple I'm referring to apart.
Mm-hmm.
We knew a family where they divorced when they were in their 60s, and the husband had a pornography addiction for years and years and years and years, and she didn't know about it until after the divorce. She
Mm.
got into his computer and discovered a bunch of stuff. So pornography is a huge, it's not an affair, it's like the mental
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's a huge issue in the church today, too,
Yeah.
because it's easy to access.
Yeah. You're replacing some things for instead of someone, like we talked about earlier.
I think it's important to safeguard whenever you interact with the opposite sex, whether it's text messages or if you're seeking counseling or something. Use the rule of three. Make sure it's not just one-on-one with somebody on the opposite sex.
Yeah. Yes. Good points.
Steven is always, he told me, he was at lunch with, I think a recruiter for someone, I knew about the lunch, and he ran into a neighbor, and he told the neighbor, he was like, Laura knows and I'm doing this lunch, I'm meeting this recruiter. Stuff can just look, and people wonder,
Yeah.
and so.
It looked bad.
But I appreciated that he told me, I knew he was having lunch, but he's like, I ran into this one, so I told him, he was just very honest about it, but I think that's important too, because if
It
you
is.
don't,
Yeah.
it look like you're hiding something, even if you're not, so I appreciated that he shared that experience.
Yeah.
I got a lot of flack from that from my neighbor.
Just this Monday, I treated this team that's been working with to lunch. We went to Halls, and I was trying to organize them. I'm like, okay, there's 4 girls and this other guy. I'm like, all right, I want them all to, I can't be stuck carpooling and then there's only one left. Those things are real. They go through your head. You can't put yourself in that position.
Just being cognizant of, the feelings and what you should do and how it looks and all.
Exactly. Everyone's watching. Okay. Thank you, class. Really appreciate your input today, and thanks for being here tonight. There's the last bell.